My father slid the contract across the long glass table and calmly reached behind him. I heard the soft click of the lock before I even looked up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He smiled and said, "You either sign the papers or I make one call, and you disappear." In that moment, I understood something that hurt more than any threat. He wasn't trying to guide me. He wasn't trying to protect anything. He was trying to erase me. Stick with me. My name is Madeline Cross. I'm 32 years old, and I run a luxury hotel chain valued at $580 million. I didn't inherit it out of kindness. I earned it through years of quiet work, hard choices, and sleepless nights. The world sees me as calm and controlled. What they don't see is how careful I had to become just to survive my own family. The meeting was called as a family emergency. That's what my father said. Richard Cross, founder, legend, the man whose name still opens doors even though he stepped back years ago. When I walked into the conference room, half the board was already seated. Faces I trusted. Faces that wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when I noticed the private security guards near the door. Not ours. His. The contract in front of me was thick. Too thick. Authority clauses buried deep. Emergency powers. Language twisted just enough to sound legal. I didn't need to read every page to know what it was. It handed him control. Full control. Over the company. Over me. He leaned back and said this was for the family legacy. He said the company needed stability. He said I'd been under too much pressure lately. Then he looked at the board and softly questioned my emotional state. That word hung in the air. Emotional. Unstable. Replaceable. I realized then this meeting wasn't about business. It was a setup. The board wasn't neutral. The exits weren't open. This wasn't advice. It was a trap. My hands were steady when I pushed the contract back toward him. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just said no. The room went quiet. My father's smile faded for the first time. Because in that moment, we both understood the truth. This was no longer a disagreement. It was war. I grew up inside half-built hotels. While other kids played in parks, I sat on dusty floors of unfinished lobbies, swinging my legs while contractors argued over blueprints. The smell of concrete and fresh paint feels more like home to me than any childhood bedroom. My father liked to say I was lucky. He said I was being raised in an empire. To the world, Richard Cross was charming. He shook hands, told stories, laughed loud. Investors loved him. Staff admired him. People said I was blessed to have a father like that. What they didn't see was the man behind closed doors. The rules. The silence. The way his mood decided the air in every room. Love in our house came with conditions. When I agreed with him, I was his pride. When I questioned him, I became a problem. I learned early that obedience kept the peace. Disagreeing meant being ignored for days, sometimes weeks. No yelling. No hitting. Just cold distance. That was his punishment. I didn't inherit the company because I was his daughter. I earned my place step by step. I studied finance while working summers at the front desk. I learned operations by watching managers fail and fixing their mistakes quietly. I stayed late. I listened more than I spoke. When deals went bad, I took the blame. When they went well, he took the credit. Still, I believed in him longer than I should have. I told myself his control was just passion, that his fear of losing power came from wanting to protect what he built. I ignored the way he hated not being in charge, the way he corrected people mid-sentence, the way he couldn't stand when someone else made a decision without him. There were signs I pushed aside. He demanded updates on everything. He questioned my judgment in front of others. He planted doubt before praise. I thought it was tough love. I thought it made me stronger. But strength wasn't what he wanted. Control was. By the time I became CEO, the company was stable because I made it that way. Profits were up. Staff turnover was down. The brand was respected. I finally thought I'd proven myself. I was wrong. That meeting didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of years of quiet pressure, ignored warnings, and a man who could not accept that his daughter no longer needed him. The betrayal didn't start with a contract. It started the moment he decided my success threatened his power. I sat in my office with Elliot Warren, my corporate attorney, the stack of papers between us feeling heavier than it looked. The room was quiet except for the soft scratch of his pen and the hum of the air conditioner. I had seen contracts before, but something about this one felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that my father had hidden something dangerous. Let's go through it line by line, Elliot said, his voice calm but tense. I nodded and leaned forward. At first, the language seemed normal, legal jargon, clauses, terms, but as we dug deeper, my stomach sank. There were transfers of debt I had never authorized, linked quietly to Richard's name. Offshore loans, guarantees, liabilities. It was as if he had been building a shadow empire on top of mine, one that would collapse me if I let it. I couldn't believe it. I had thought this was about control, about his ego, about him needing to feel superior. But now it was clear. He was drowning in private debt, and he wanted me to bail him out with my company. My company. Everything I had worked for. Everything I had earned with my own blood and sleepless nights. Elliot looked up from the documents, his expression serious. He's crossed a line, Madeline. This isn't just family pressure. It's criminal. The words hit me harder than any insult, any punishment from my father in my childhood. He wasn't just controlling me emotionally anymore. He was trying to take everything I built, and if I failed, it could go further than that. It wasn't just my company. He could drag me into debt, ruin my reputation, maybe even my freedom. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment. My father had spent years teaching me to trust him, to value family above all. And now every lesson, every story he told me, every smile in public, it was a lie. He had never cared about the company, not really. He cared about leverage, about power, about keeping me under his thumb. The stakes were no longer theoretical. This wasn't about proving myself to him anymore. This was survival. My company, my life, my freedom, they were all on the line. I realized I couldn't negotiate, I couldn't appease him. If I wanted to survive this, I had to be smarter, faster, and colder than he ever expected. And just like that, the betrayal turned from painful to dangerous. The fight for my life and my company had only just begun. I walked into the boardroom and felt the tension before I even sat down. Faces I had trusted for years were there, but something was off. Their smiles were polite, but their eyes avoided mine. I could see it, loyalty wasn't to me. It was to him, my father, Richard Cross. Over the years, I had thought the board was neutral. I believed they were here to guide the company, to make fair decisions. But now I realized many of them had been quietly compromised. Favors, deals, promises of promotion, threats disguised as advice. My father had built a web around them, and I had been walking straight into it. As he spoke about the family legacy and the need for stability, I watched reactions. Some nodded eagerly, hanging on his every word. Others shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. It became clear who had been bought, who had been scared, and who simply wanted to survive by siding with him. One board member, James Harlow, hesitated. His hand lingered over the papers as if he couldn't decide whether to sign. His eyes met mine for a brief second, almost apologetic. That tiny moment told me everything I needed to know. Even in a room full of people my father controlled, cracks were showing. Not everyone was loyal to fear. I began thinking fast. If I could find the right leverage, the right truth to expose, I could turn the board against him without ever raising my voice. I didn't need to fight them all at once. I needed strategy, patience, and precision. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about observation and calculation. I also realized that the people who had sold me out weren't evil. They were trapped. Just like I had been trapped by his control for years, they were now trapped by his influence. That meant one thing. If I played carefully, I could free them too. Their hesitation could become my advantage. By the time the meeting ended, I had a plan forming in my head. I would not react with anger. I would not make threats. I would show them a path forward that made sense to them, while slowly taking away my father's grip on everyone in the room. For the first time since this whole betrayal started, I felt a flicker of control. I wasn't just fighting him anymore. I was turning the room, the company, and the game itself in my favor. And he didn't even know it yet. I sat across from my father at the conference table, pretending to be exhausted, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I let my shoulders slump just enough, let my voice sound softer, a little uncertain. Every word I spoke was measured, every pause intentional. I wanted him to think he had me cornered. Richard's eyes lit up. That smile, the one that had always made me feel small, spread across his face. He leaned back, satisfied, convinced he had won. See, Madeline? You understand now. This is for the family. For the company. You don't have a choice, he said, his tone smug, like a cat playing with a trapped mouse. Inside, my heart was steady. Calm. I was far from trapped. Every gesture, every hint of doubt I showed was a mask. I wasn't scared. I wasn't giving in. I was gathering information, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The board thought I was faltering, and my father thought he had measured me completely. He hadn't. He kept talking, listing reasons I should sign, reasons I should surrender control. His voice was smooth, persuasive, almost tender at times. It was the voice of a man used to getting everything he wanted. But I heard the cracks in it, the arrogance. He underestimated me. He thought obedience was all I knew, that I would fold just because he demanded it. I nodded occasionally, careful to appear compliant, careful to hide the fire building inside me. Every time he smiled, I reminded myself of the little girl I used to be, hiding in unfinished hotel lobbies, learning to obey just to survive. That girl had survived. And so had I, but now I had power he had never imagined I could hold. The room was silent except for our conversation. My father's overconfidence filled the space, but I felt the shift inside me. I was no longer reacting to fear. I was orchestrating it. I let him feel control, let him think he had me. But behind that calm mask, I was planning every move, calculating every outcome, and preparing to turn his arrogance against him. By the end of that day, Richard believed he had tamed me. He left the room smiling, victorious. But he had no idea he had just walked into a trap of his own making. I let him think I was cornered, but in reality, I was in control, and the game was only beginning. I spent the weekend in my office, surrounded by stacks of financial statements, loan agreements, and emails that had been quietly copied to me over the years. I had already suspected something was wrong, but I didn't realize just how deep it went. As I reviewed each document with a careful eye, my stomach sank. Richard had hidden more than I imagined. Secret loans, offshore accounts, personal guarantees, all tied to my name or the company I controlled. He had been building a shadow empire, one that depended on my assets to survive. Every number told a story of desperation, of risk piled on risk, of a man who was drowning in debt while pretending to the world that he was untouchable. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it sink in. His empire, the one everyone admired, was never stable. It had been a house of cards built on borrowed money and illusions. My company, on the other hand, was real. Profitable. Growing. Respected. Built with sweat, strategy, and countless sleepless nights. I realized I wasn't just holding the key to my own success. I held the key to his survival, or his downfall. But I didn't need to destroy him publicly. I didn't need to humiliate him or drag him through the press. That wasn't the point. The point was control, precision, and patience. I could outlast him financially, quietly reclaim what was rightfully mine, and let the system do its work. Let him choke on the debts he had hidden under my name while I stayed calm, steady, and in control. I thought about the fear in his eyes when he had tried to corner me, the arrogance that made him think I could be manipulated so easily. He had underestimated me at every turn, thinking I would act emotionally, act rashly, act in the way he might have. But I didn't have to act. I just had to wait, and I had all the advantage. By the time I closed the last file, the path forward was clear. I didn't need a battle in the boardroom. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. I had the resources, the knowledge, and the patience to let him unravel under the weight of his own mistakes. Every secret debt, every hidden loan, every personal guarantee would become his undoing, and all I had to do was watch and move with quiet precision. For the first time, I felt free from fear. I wasn't fighting blindly anymore. I had the power, and I would use it carefully, but absolutely. I spent the next few weeks quietly moving behind the scenes. Every step was calculated, every action hidden. Using intermediaries and trusted advisors, I began acquiring the debts Richard had hidden in my name. Loans that once gave him leverage now quietly shifted under my control. He had no idea. It was a slow process. Each debt purchased, each loan transferred, felt like a piece on a chessboard. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I watched the way he continued to act confident, the way he smiled at board meetings and spoke as if nothing was wrong. Little did he know, the very tools he had planned to use against me were now turning against him. The legal work was meticulous. Contracts had to be perfect, transfers invisible, all intermediaries coordinated without leaving a trace. I had built a network of people I trusted completely, people who understood the stakes and knew how to move quietly. Every signed document, every approval, brought me closer to a position Richard would never see coming. And then the shift began. He started to call on the debts he thought would pressure me. He tried to lean on me, to threaten me, to push me into making mistakes. Each time he did, I calmly reminded him that the leverage he thought he had no longer existed. Piece by piece, he lost control. Without realizing it, he was trapped in the very system he had designed to trap me. The power dynamic reversed, slowly but surely. The fear I had felt in that conference room the first day he threatened me began to transform into something stronger, controlled fury. Not anger that made me reckless, but the kind of calm certainty that comes from knowing you are untouchable because you've planned every move, anticipated every trap, and stayed one step ahead. I watched him stumble, unknowingly weakened by his own actions. I didn't gloat. I didn't announce it. I simply let the law, the contracts, and his own debts do the work for me. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control. The little girl who had learned to obey out of fear was gone. In her place stood a woman who understood that patience, strategy, and precision were more powerful than rage. Richard had thought he owned me, but in reality, I had quietly bought the leash with his own money. And now, I held all the power. I sent out the meeting notice on my terms, careful to make it look routine. The board would be there, the lawyers would be present, but the key detail was hidden. Richard had no idea what was waiting for him. I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. When he arrived, he walked in with that same confident stride, the same smug smile he always used when he thought he was in control. He looked around the room, glanced at the papers on the table, and said, "I hope this won't take long." He had no idea that this time, the game had completely changed. I stayed calm as everyone settled. My attorneys placed the new documents in front of him, and I let him pick them up first. His eyes scanned the pages, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion. Then the realization began to hit. The debts he had once used as threats, the tools he had relied on to control me, were now in my name. I was the one holding the leverage. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. "Madeline, what is this?" His voice had lost some of its usual authority. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch. It was more powerful than words. Then I spoke, calm and measured. "You used these debts to threaten me once. Now, legally, the same rules apply to you. You can either comply, or you face the consequences." My words were quiet, but carried the weight of everything he had tried to teach me about power and control. Richard's face changed as he realized the truth. His confidence faltered, the smugness fading into shock. He had thought he could corner me, but he had never stopped to see the game from my side. Every move he had made to control me had been anticipated. Every threat he used was now reflected back at him. The room stayed silent, the air thick with tension. He tried to speak, to argue, to twist the words, but nothing worked. This was precise, legal, and unbreakable. There was no yelling, no pleading, no public spectacle, just quiet, devastating justice. By the time the meeting ended, he had no leverage left. I had stayed calm, restrained, and in complete control. The tables had turned completely, and Richard Cross, the man who had once made me feel powerless, was now at my mercy. I didn't celebrate. I just knew the war had reached a turning point, and for the first time, the power was completely mine. The day came when Richard finally realized he had no moves left. I called him into my office, and for the first time, the confident man who had once threatened me looked small and steady. His facade, the charm, the arrogance, the control was gone. He was just a man staring at the consequences of his own choices. He started talking fast, trying to explain, trying to reframe everything. "Madeline, you don't understand. I did this for the family. I wanted to protect the company." His words tumbled over each other, excuses layered on excuses. He blamed board members, lawyers, even me in ways that made no sense. He tried to shift responsibility like he always did. I listened quietly, my face calm. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I refused to fall into the trap of letting him manipulate me emotionally. I had been there before, years of pretending to obey, of worrying about his moods, of fearing his control. That fear was gone. I wasn't the little girl hiding in unfinished hotel lobbies anymore. I was the woman in charge, and I wasn't letting him distort reality for his comfort. Finally, I spoke, and my voice was steady. "You think this is about the company? It's about control. It's about how you tried to make me feel small, unworthy, replaceable. You took my childhood, my confidence, and every lesson about trust and love you taught me was tied to fear." He looked at me like I had slapped him, eyes wide, mouth open. There was nothing left to charm him, nothing left to manipulate. He realized I saw clearly now. All the favors, the threats, the smiles in public, they were all lies. I laid out the consequences calmly. No yelling, no grand speeches. Just clear, enforced steps. The debts he hid, the control he tried to wield, the board members he had manipulated. It was all neutralized legally and permanently. He would have to face it. He began to plead, softer now, like a stranger asking for mercy. But I didn't give it. I didn't need to. The power had shifted entirely. He wasn't my father in this room anymore. He was just a man facing the results of his choices. I walked out knowing that the real victory wasn't humiliation or revenge. It was justice, precise and quiet, finally balanced and fully in my hands. He had begged like a stranger, and I had never felt more free. The day it was official, I sat in the boardroom and watched as the final papers were signed. Richard Cross, the man who had tried to control me, manipulate me, and erase me, was removed from the company permanently. There was no celebration, no gloating, no dramatic speech. Just quiet, exact justice. The board had been restructured carefully. Those who had been loyal to Fear Now had clear lines of accountability, and the company's leadership was secure under people who valued integrity and long-term vision. Every step I had taken over the past months, every move I had planned quietly, had led to this moment. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about making sure the company survived and thrived without the shadow of his control hanging over it. I walked through the offices, seeing familiar faces, the staff who had worked tirelessly under pressure, sometimes silently fearing the boardroom drama they only caught glimpses of. Their smiles now were lighter, their trust in leadership restored. The hotel chain I had built, grown, and protected was finally mine in the truest sense. Not just the name on the door, but the culture, the stability, and the future. Richard's presence was gone, but the lessons remained. I felt a strange sense of closure. Not forgiveness, because he had not earned it, and not revenge in the emotional sense, because that would have been messy and loud. What I felt was peace. A peace that comes from knowing the truth, seeing justice done, and holding power responsibly. The fear and manipulation that had marked my youth were gone. I kept my name. I kept everything I had built. The hotel chain was safe. My employees, my reputation, my work. It all belonged to me now. He had lost his power, quietly, methodically, and permanently. I thought back to the first day he had tried to corner me in the conference room. The threat, the contract, the locked door, it had felt like the end. But in reality, it had been the beginning of a fight I was destined to win. Revenge didn't need to be loud or public. It didn't need to humiliate. It was precise, patient, and permanent. For the first time, I truly felt free. Free from fear, free from manipulation, and free to move forward without looking back. My company, my life, my name, they were mine. And finally, that was enough. This story shows how understanding your legal rights and staying calm under pressure can turn the tables on even the most powerful threats. Always review contracts carefully, track financial obligations, and seek trusted legal advice. Knowledge, patience, and strategy are your strongest tools for protecting your assets and your future.